A new pro-UFO disclosure organization has been created with former military intelligence officials playing a prominent role. Representative Anna Luna discusses congressional efforts to learn about UAP-related events at Eglin Air Force Base and the role of Men in Black to stymie the investigation. Golden Pyramids, Ascension and Human Liberation. Recruitment of children with special abilities by the military intelligence community has been secretly happening for many decades. JP update number 34, mission to ancient biodome with extinct plant life. Japanese lawmakers have created their own UFO study group to discuss UAP sightings and their possible national security threat. The Calvine UFO photo from 1990 showing a 100-foot-long diamond-shaped UFO has only recently re-emerged. These stories and more on Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome to Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review for June 8th. I have a lot of stories to cover, so let's get through it. And apologies if I do end up coughing. I'm still recovering from some kind of bug from my Egypt trip a couple of weeks ago. So let's begin. So this is a story about the creation of a new UFO disclosure organization that comprises former intelligence and military officials playing a prominent role. So here's the organization, the UAP Disclosure Fund, Demand the Truth. So it has an interesting lineup of individuals. So the mission is, it's a non-partisan political non-profit 501c4, so that means a funding charity that advocates for greater government transparency regarding unidentified anomalous phenomena. We work to support new UAP legislation, provide legal representation for whistleblowers, prominent scientific research, and raise public awareness in an event to better address the UAP issue. So some of these officials are Luis Elizondo, the former head of the Aerospace Threat Identification Program, former intelligence official with the Pentagon. Gary Nolan he works at the Department of Pathology at Stanford, but has also worked on classified programs related to the military. Carl Nell, a retired senior military officer. Now he's a corporate strategist. Christopher Mellon, a former Deputy Assistant Director of Defense for Intelligence. And so, yeah, that just gives you an idea, for some of the officials involved in this organization. So we have to ask ourselves, is this a genuine breakthrough for a UAP organization that is going to be funding UFO research, or is it something designed to be a kind of limited hangout that gets money and distributes that to projects that really promote a kind of very limited perspective on what's really going on, as opposed to revealing the truth? So something we need to ask ourselves whenever any organization is formed comprising many former public and intelligence officials, whether it's really to carry the issue forward or just kind of limit the information, kind of play a gatekeeper role and steer the public towards a very limited understanding of what is going on. Kind of very similar to what the ARROW office has done. That's the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. When that was created, there were a lot of people hoping, along with myself, that this would be a step forward. But what's happened is that it has actually done the opposite to what was intended. Rather than facilitating or encouraging and protecting whistleblowers to come forward and reveal what's going on, the ARROW office has actually handicapped them, or at the very least made it difficult for them to reveal all their story. Jean-Charles Moyen, he did an interview where he discusses these old audio tapes from 1988 and 1992. So actually, this is a video that he has released called The Secret Records. So he discusses these two tapes discovered when he was 18 years old and 22 years old, where he discusses his participation in a military-related space program and also his contact experiences with extraterrestrials. So this was in 1988. And so that kind of like was very significant because it meant that he was talking about these things decades before many others. And Jean-Charles has come under some criticism, especially in the French world, for maybe copying. He's been accused by trolls or debunkers of copying other people's testimonies. So he was very happy to find these old tapes and to release those. So I did an interview with Jean-Charles where we could discuss this in detail, and that'll be coming out next Monday or next week. So you'll get to hear that firsthand. All right, so here is Representative Anna Luna, where she did a interview where she discussed the Men in Black. So she says in this interview that she got Men in Black, that she went to Eglin Air Force Base and that they went there because they were going to get a briefing from the senior or from the base commander concerning UAP-related events, and the commander, midway through his briefing with them, said he stood up and left, saying that he's immediately taking leave, and that there were men in black there or intelligence officials who stymied the investigation. So very interesting. So here you have a member of the US Congress saying that she got Men in Black, and that really stands for unknown officials, typically wearing black suits, intervening and stifling or intimidating witnesses and preventing evidence from being released. So here's the trailer for my next webinar. Is going to be taking place on June 15, and it concerns ancient ET gods among us today, the exopolitical implications. And, you know, why is this webinar important? Well, I think it's important because what we see and what I found in my Egypt visit was all these hieroglyphs that show these non-human intelligences living and working amongst us. And I think what we can conclude from all of that data is that there was a time in the ancient past in Egypt when the gods or extraterrestrials that were non-human openly lived and walked among humanity. And what was really interesting was that they got along with one another, and that they shared wisdom, they shared healing, and so they were teachers, healers, really helping humanity incorporate some of the advanced technologies. So in this webinar, I'm going to be presenting that data, and really I think contrasting that with the Anunnaki from Sumer, because when we look at the Sumerian gods or the extraterrestrials that are associated with the Anunnaki, I think there's a pattern, a clear pattern of how they interacted with their human subjects. When we contrast that with the Egyptian gods, there's a different pattern, and I'll be talking about the different pattern and what that suggests. So yes, definitely tune in, and I hope you can join me in my next webinar on June 15, Ancient ET Gods Among Us today. Okay, so I did a interview with Coast to Coast AM discussing the ancient Egyptian connection to extraterrestrials and my trip to Egypt. So this was with George Norrie on Coast to Coast, and so that was for 2 hours, and we discussed uh, different ETs or different Egyptian gods such as Sobek, Horus, uh, Anubis, and their relationship with these non-human extraterrestrials. So that's something you can listen to kind of get an idea of some of the things I'll be discussing at my upcoming webinar. Okay, so this is Star Nations News by Elena Danaan, and in her June 3rd edition of Star Nations News, she discussed a lot of events happening in our solar system. Now, some of those events concern the Clipper mission to Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter, the history of Saturn, which is long been associated with the Anunnaki. She discussed the extraterrestrial Earth Alliance trade agreements. So that's very important, that there are these trade agreements that have been reached. She discusses black goo, the Anunnaki, and more issues. So you get another perspective of what's happening in our solar system. And this perspective, of course, is from extraterrestrials that are communicating with Elena Danaan. I did an interview with Scott Lemriel that came out this week. I believe that was on Monday, Golden Pyramids, Ascension, and Human Liberation. So Scott is a experiencer. He's written 4 books, and in his books, he discusses his own. His books are fiction based on fact, and so what he does is to present the data concerning extraterrestrial visitation, concerning extraterrestrial manipulation and control of our solar system and of the planet, but through the lens or through the perspective of an entertaining story. But he insists that this is all based on real events. And he talks about shape-shifting reptilians, and he talks about the appearance of these golden pyramids from higher dimensions appearing in our solar system and appearing on Earth and having a transformative effect on people and on extraterrestrials themselves. So it really is a fascinating interview. He has been talking about these contact issues for well over a decade now, and he's got 4 books. So well worth listening to that interview if you haven't already. Now here's a update by Ruzo Zanrico, who is a contractor working for a contractor to the US military. And he has used this pseudonym, Ruzo Zanrico, because he doesn't want to damage his career. But he's very interested in JP's claims concerning a space ark in the Atlantic Ocean. And so what he's done is that he has been sharing with me his monitoring of ship activity in that area of the Atlantic where JP has identified the space ark as being buried. Originally, it was hidden or at the bottom of the ocean in the Bermuda Triangle region about 6 months ago. JP says that the space ark was moved more towards the center of the Atlantic. And so in this video, he's shared a written overview and also a video of what he has seen. And so here what you see is a kind of like a video compilation that summarizing his observations. that you have this anomalous ship activity working in groups in areas where JP has described the Space Ark as being hidden. And JP has said that when he has traveled to the Space Ark, he's been on 6 missions now to the Space Ark. He says that there is typically a donut-shaped US Navy ship immediately over the Space Ark, and it's connected by a tube and a kind of elevated tube that goes from the surface of the ocean to the Space Ark, allowing people to enter into it. But there's typically a number of ships around the Space Ark. And that what happened as the Space Ark became more internationalized, more ships appeared around it. And so that's why Russo has been monitoring ship activity, because he's trying to find empirical evidence that, in fact, you have in the middle of the Atlantic, you have these ships that are congregating around this buried or this submerged Space Ark, where there is this big Navy donut-shaped ship directly over it, allowing people to gain entry to the Space Ark. So there you have the map showing the approximate area. It's kind of like 1/3 of the way from the east coast of the United States to the west coast of Africa. So 1/3 of the way is roughly the area where the Space Ark is buried. Previously, it was hidden much closer to the US in the Bermuda Triangle area, which is just off the coast of Miami and Cuba, and I think Puerto Rico is the third island to make the triangle. Now, here's an interview that Billy Carson did with Joe Rogan. So that was a very interesting interview. I was very impressed with Billy Carson's performance. He's quite knowledgeable when it comes to hidden archaeology, and I was especially impressed by his story of Adapa, the recounting of the legend of Adapa, which is where you have one of the Sumerian gods, Enki or Ea, helping humanity by tweaking human DNA so that these incredible abilities can be developed within us, that we had this DNA potential that is something that allows us to even become more evolved or to outshine the Anunnaki themselves. And Enki apparently was very pleased with that discovery and wanted to nurture that, whereas his half-brother Enlil was furious. He didn't want anything to do with an overly intelligent, creative humanity that would one day rival the Anunnaki. What he wanted was dumbed-down workers that would be easily manipulated and controlled. So that's very interesting to have that kind of rendition of Adapa just being revealed by Billy Carson. Others have talked about this. I think it's very interesting that other researchers who have been focusing on the Anunnaki have identified Enki as being the one that saw this incredible potential in humanity, and Enlil, his brother, wanting to stifle that. Okay, so this is a book by a military whistleblower. So Simon & Schuster, a major book publishing company, wins the bidding war for the memoirs by a former U.S. intelligence officer tangled up in a very mysterious project or military program. So Scott Andrews says that he was involved with the U.S. military for 36 years, and that he was experiencing some enhanced abilities as a result of his experiences with the US military. And what's very interesting in the story of Scott Andrews is that there are many similarities to what secret space program witnesses have described in terms of memory wipes, uh, covert service as a minor, that they get recruited as children, that they're identified. So that's a very interesting book that is going to be coming out under the Simon & Schuster label. Okay, so here is a interview or a story with Ross Coulthart discussing the Scott Andrews book that's going to be coming out. And in this, Ross Coulthart, the Australian journalist, says that Luis Elizondo vouched for Scott Andrews as being credible. Okay, so again, it's focusing on Scott Andrews, but especially the grooming of children with special abilities. So you have this case where there is this long-term military whistleblower, Scott Andrews, saying that he was identified as a child, as a minor, and that these abilities were developed in the secret program, military program that he was involved in. Well, this has been going on for many, many decades. And in this tweet, what I brought up was the case of Michael Crevant Wolf, who in the 1950s, as a minor, began summoning UFOs and displayed very advanced psi abilities. And this was something that I recall reading first in the book by George Hunt Williamson. It was a book he wrote in the late 50s or early 60s where he referred to Michael Wolf. And so there you have, going back as early as the 1950s, you have these UFO researchers, George Hunt Williamson being one of the prominent researchers of that era, saying that there are these precocious children that are doing things like summoning UFOs, starting UFO clubs, displaying all kinds of advanced psychic abilities, and that they are eagerly sought after by the US military. So this has been going on for a long time. Others more recently, Andrew Basiago, Stuart Swerdlow, Randy Kramer, all identified themselves as being children when they were identified as having precocious abilities and were recruited into these secret military programs. Okay, so here's something that I just thought I needed to comment on. I've been watching the Danaan, which features the geopolitical analysis of several individuals who typically present very succinct accounts of what is happening around the world. And in this interview by the Danaan, they featured Professor Jeffrey Sachs discussing historic US efforts to dismantle Russia dating from Richard Cheney and Zbigniew Brzezinski in the early 1990s. So this is after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Agreements were reached that the West would not move one iota towards the East, that Russia was assured that it would be kind of welcomed into the NATO and into the European alliance, but that all of that was backtracked because Richard Cheney and Zbigniew Brzezinski were part of this neocon agenda, and that neocons are neoconservatives or neoliberals that believe conflict with Russia is inevitable, that the optimal outcome is to actually break Russia up. into at least 3 states. And that according to this this geopolitical analysis that quite a few researchers make, that you have this group of powerful individuals, neocons, whether they're among the Republican Party, whether they're among the Democratic Party, who advocate for this perennial conflict with Russia to try to take it down, and that the most recent manifestation of that is this Ukraine conflict, which was wholly contrived to take Russia down. So in this analysis, in this geopolitical analysis, which is getting a lot of currency, what I want to point out is that typically the analysis comes to the conclusion that, well, these neocons are crazy, that they want to get, they're pushing the United States into a nuclear war with Russia. That doesn't make sense. These guys and their supporters are just crazy dudes. And that if you expose them, that supposedly the adults in the room will get up and say, hey, these guys are crazy. They need to be moved out of these positions of power. So that's the extent of the geopolitical analysis, that these imperialistic efforts by the US ultimately reduces down to a few crazed individuals that are called neocons or neoliberals that pursue these kind of like unrealistic goals, like breaking Russia down or apart. Now, the problem is that they lack a exopolitical analysis. In other words, these individuals that do propose the breakup of Russia, that they're not really the ones that are powerful behind the scenes players making all this happen. I think what's really happening is that they're playing the role of the useful idiot, where they're the front man or front woman for these powerful secret societies that have an agenda, a much deeper, darker agenda, and that these secret societies are well-backed, well-resourced, with lots of funding to be able to play these roles of bringing about the destruction of major countries such as the Russian Federation. So ultimately it comes down to who's behind world conflict. Is it going to always come down to a few crazed neocons, neoliberals who have this kind of poisonous worldview that infects people to take on these unrealistic goals, like risking a nuclear war with a major country like Russia? Or is it that there are these secret societies and even extraterrestrials operating behind the scenes that are using these individuals as kind of like useful idiots to achieve their goal, which I think extends beyond taking down Russia? It extends to taking down the United States and bringing about a third world war. That's something that I think these individuals, Jeffrey Sachs, the Danaan reporters, that they miss the very plausible idea that what's really behind this kind of like geopolitical conflict is not these crazed individuals that are making idiotic decisions. It's actually a very dark, sinister group that want to bring about a third world war. That's their agenda. Okay, JP update: mission to an ancient biodome with extinct plant life. So this is update number 34. And this is a biodome where he was taken. And in the first volume of US Army Insider Missions, I discussed JP being taken to a biodome in, I think it was 2015. So this was a very similar biodome, which is a very large dome with a lot of vegetation. It's a very large habitat. We're talking several miles in diameter, with a kind of hemispheric roof and clouds and all kinds of plant and insect life, and that he was there sampling all of this, and that there were terraces, so that this biodome was arranged with terraces around it. So very, very interesting. He believes that this biodome is underground, not on the Earth, but on the moon. So that's very significant that he thinks that this is actually located there. And we talk about gravity, the effect of gravity, and how even though it could be on the moon, that the gravity in the biodome is similar to Earth, because that's the optimal condition for plant life to grow in that biodome. So very interesting update by JP. Okay, so here's a presentation by Ross Coulthart, who's an award-winning investigative reporter from Australia, and he did a presentation to the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. And he discussed his journey to accepting the reality of UFOs. So he discussed reading Nick Cook's book. He discussed some early stories or reports he had from individuals about UFO sightings that he thought were nonsense, or he was told that these were nonsense. He described hearing from Australian Air Force pilots about UFO reality, and that kind of shocked him into believing that there's something real here, even though he at the time thought it was nonsense. And he has been hearing the testimonies of individuals such as Colonel Carl Nell, David Grush, Luis Elizondo, Kit Green, Admiral Tim Gallaudet, and others, convincing him that UFOs related to non-human intelligence have been recovered and are being secretly reverse engineered around the world, albeit unsuccessfully in the US. So this is where I have to part company with Ross Coulthart, because up until this point, I think he does a really outstanding job in covering all of these different sources. And so kudos to him for doing that. But then there is this very curious or even suspicious, I mean, I think it's right to be suspicious, where he completely ignores the work of Dr. Stephen Greer, who since the 1990s has found hundreds, actually today it's over 1,000 credible insiders and whistleblowers who have talked about the UFO phenomenon, and how there has been the retrieval of UFO craft and their successful reverse engineering. That's the key here, successful. Now, Ross Coulthart, he has been covering these individuals that are saying that, well, these UFOs have been recovered, they're non-human intelligence, but the technology is just way ahead, too far advanced for humanity at this point, and that the best corporations, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, these organizations have not been able to reverse engineer these technologies. But our peers are working on it. Maybe the peers, Russia or China may have had breakthroughs, but in the US, no breakthroughs have happened yet. So that's the story that comes through this information that Ross Coulthart and others have been proposing. And it's a limited hangout. I mean, that's what it is. It needs to be called out for what it is. Now, is Coulthart doing this consciously? Is he doing it out of good faith? That he's followed the trail of the most credible whistleblowers, and it leads to this conclusion. And he's in good company. George Knapp, Jeremy Corbell, quite a few other researchers have reached a similar conclusion that, this stuff has been recovered, but it's too advanced and we haven't been able to successfully reverse engineer it. But I have to call them out on that, because the witnesses that Stephen Greer has been able to identify and bring out into the public arena, that it's very, very clear that these craft have been successfully reverse engineered. And you can begin with Ben Rich from Lockheed Martin's Skunk Work. I mean, he was the former director of Skunk Works, and he's on the record. Well, he was overheard, or he said at lectures that he gave that that Skunk Works has been able to develop technology to take ET home. So this is not like something that they are still working on. It's like it was developed, and there are many others that Greer has presented in his interviews and in his 2001 book Disclosure. So that book has just over 60 witnesses, their testimonies, and if you read that, it's very clear that these UFOs have been successfully recovered and reverse engineered. And why Coulthart and others are saying that they haven't been reverse engineered, I think we have to be suspicious, or at the very least curious, as to why they could reach such a conclusion and why they're ignoring Greer and the hundreds of whistleblowers that he's identified. Here's a story about Japanese lawmakers creating their own UFO study group to discuss UAP sightings as possible national security threat. Excuse me. So Japanese lawmakers have created their own UFO study group where they're now looking at UAP sightings as a possible national security threat. So they're following that same path that national legislatures in the United States and Mexico have followed. It's unfortunate that the national security card has to be played. Apparently, those advocating national legislatures getting involved in the UAP phenomenon, they pitch it in a way that, well, you need to do this. It's not an issue of curiosity or kind of like social justice, right to know, and so forth. It's because these UFOs are a national security threat, and that's how they're being able to pitch it. And national legislatures are starting to respond and saying that, yes, we will study this because it is, we agree, a national security threat. And that's unfortunate because it does create the environment that people are going to look at UFOs and any future disclosures in terms of them being this kind of unknown national security threat, when in fact they've been around for 80 years now. And if they were a genuine national security threat, I think we would have found that out long ago. Okay, William Cooper. And he was one of the first people to talk about the US government forming treaties with aliens, with extraterrestrial visitors. Now, William Cooper, he was a pioneer. He began to talk about this in the 1990s. He wrote a book, Behold the Pale Horse, which is still a classic. It's one of the most widely read, most popular UFO books. And but nevertheless, he was widely debunked by most UFO researchers. I remember when I first started to do my UFO research and talk about what I had found, and I cited William Cooper, a lot of the kind of mainstream UFO researchers really jumped onto me and said, well, you know, you're making a big mistake citing William Cooper. He's a fraud, he's a liar. But yet when you look at his credentials, he served on the intelligence briefing team of the commander of the Pacific Fleet. And so he had access as part of his job to classified US Navy documents. And he says that these were the foundation for his claims that he later made. Now, I don't doubt that William Cooper probably spiced his stories a little bit with some contrivances or some maybe he embellished a little bit, probably so that he would protect himself, because that's one of the things that I think is very important for whistleblowers who come, especially in the 1990s, who came forward, that if you are putting out exactly what it was that you encountered, that you would be eliminated. Phil Schneider is a good example of that. He came out in 1995, talked about what he encountered in these underground bases, and he was eliminated months, not even a year after coming forward. So William Cooper understood the danger. So I think he embellished and actually sowed his own revelations with some disinformation to protect himself. So, some people will say, well, that makes him a liar and we don't want to consider him at all, throw the baby out with the bathwater. And, I don't believe in that. I have to always take the side of the whistleblower who has to be very careful of how much they can reveal safely without being targeted. And I know that this happens even with JP, who I've been working with since 2008. He's been subject to several assassination attempts. He's been followed, he's been harassed, intimidated. So he has to be very, very careful as to how much he reveals. So, and this is happening today. So, and I think in the 1990s, it was a much more difficult environment. Okay, so here's a photo from 1990, and I thought this would be a good one to cover, because here you have a very clear photo, and here you have a diamond-shaped UFO, and there's a jet or an aircraft flying nearby it, monitoring it, escorting it, and this is a clear photo taken by two British chefs in 1990, and the story goes that so one of them took the photo, and they talked about this what they had seen, and that very quickly what happened was that two men in black showed up. Apparently, they were from the Royal Navy, and they debriefed these two gentlemen and really kind of like scared them so much that they soon after disappeared. So this story that's published in the Daily Mail is based on the revelations of one of their colleagues who revealed what these two chefs saw. And what is significant to me is that this was a diamond-shaped UFO that was being accompanied by some sort of aircraft. Well, 10 years earlier, in 1980, you had in Texas, you had the Cash Landrum incident. And that involved another diamond-shaped UFO that was being accompanied by a number of Chinook helicopters. And according to a former Air Force Office of Special Investigations agent, Richard Doty, that was a craft that was being flight tested in 1980. So this diamond-shaped craft in 1980 that was flying ahead of this kind of like a squadron of Chinook helicopters was being flight tested, and that a family, the Cash Landrum family, was nearby, and they suffered radiation burns, and actually took the Pentagon to court, but they lost the case. But that happened in 1980. So in 1990, 10 years later, you have this this incident where you have this diamond-shaped UFO. Now, with the Cash Landrum incident, what was described was that the UFO, the diamond-shaped UFO, was on its side. So you imagine this diamond-shaped UFO on its side being escorted by a number of Chinook helicopters. So I thought there's an interesting connection between those two things. And, this goes to what I was saying earlier, that here's another case, or here's a case, and one of the things that the chefs said was that they said it was the Americans. So the Americans were behind this in some way. So that kind of supports what I was saying earlier, that the reverse engineering of retrieved alien spacecraft has been successful, and that these diamond-shaped UFOs are reverse engineered craft that are part of the kind of like the US intelligence, US military that are being used secretly. Okay, so here's a story and I need to be careful how I phrase this because of YouTube. So this is an interview on Redacted, and this is an interview where Clayton Morris discusses the findings of this former Customs and Border Protection agent, J.J. Carroll, where he discusses the disappearance of these illegal immigrant children, and he describes how 600,000 of them have simply disappeared. Now, I mean, I think you should watch this interview on Redacted and get the full details of how or what is happening. But what I wanted to kind of discuss is that this human trafficking is one of the sources for the CIA raising enormous funds off the book. I've discussed in the past, I have a chapter in I actually wrote a research paper back in 2004, 2005, and it's in my 2009 book on exopolitics. And what I found is that the CIA has a second black budget. You have the official black budget, which funds the intelligence community. That's around $80 billion a year. And then you have this second, more secretive black budget, which uses illicit funds gained from all kinds of activities such as drug running, pump and dump economics, insider trading on Wall Street, and human trafficking. And they use those funds, and of course the illegal arms trade. All of those funds are used by the CIA for these deep underground military bases and secret space programs. I mean, how else are you going to develop a vast network of deep underground military bases and secret space programs without Congress being in the loop? You can't do it using congressional appropriations, using funding from Congress, because members of Congress will say, well, you know, where's all this money going? So you need to come up with an alternative revenue source. So the CIA was given that job soon after its creation in 1947, and I discussed this in my 2005 paper. Let me actually find that for you so that you can see for yourself. I'll just go to my website. So in my 2005 paper, okay, we'll have trouble finding that off the top of my head, but you can go to the website and just look at go to exopolitics.org and look up the black budget. And I discuss how over $1 trillion a year is raised by the CIA for this black budget, and the human trafficking of little people, children, is something that is very real, and this is connected to a galactic slave trade, believe it or not. Yes, that this actually extends out into space, that there is an extraterrestrial element, and if you want a compelling testimony discussing that, then I would start with the testimony of Tony Rodriguez, who's a child survivor of human trafficking and of a galactic slave trade. So you actually have a witness of a participant, a former victim of a galactic slave trade, and he's done research and come up with evidence supporting his incredible claims. So that's it for Exopolitics today, the week in review. In 1 week's time, that's next Saturday, I will have my next webinar on the ancient Egyptian gods among us today. So that's something that you can take a look at. I encourage you to register for that. That's a great way to continue to support my exopolitics research. And I thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
You have been listening to Exopolitics today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.